Hi, I'm John Mancini. I'm with Content Results and happy to be working with AIIM on the Industry Watch program. And what I wanted to do today is share some of the background story behind our most recent research study on Office 365 and how it factors in to the information management infrastructures of organizations. So in thinking about this, there's an important context to keep in mind as you think about this report. The first one is about the terminology used in this project. Now, I will say there's a lot of branding confusion out there relative to when you're talking about Microsoft 365, SharePoint, Office 365. And so I should say that as part of this project, we adopted the convention that we would use the term Office 365 to talk about the bundle of document and process intensive capabilities, including SharePoint, that are most familiar to an AIIM audience. So that's what we've used during the context of this, and I realize it's shorthand and it probably will need to be updated to Microsoft 365 next year. And the purpose of this report is not to endorse Office 365 or anybody else for that matter, to be honest, but it is to recognize that Office 365 and SharePoint are ubiquitous and they are present in almost any organization. And so what does that mean? And what do you do about that? And how do you use other products in conjunction with Office 365 and SharePoint? And how do you optimize its capabilities? And that's really the point of this research project. So there are 4 points that we wanted to cover in this project. And the first one is a more generic point, and that ties to content cloud platforms generically, and then go a little bit more deeply into Office 365. So the first thing, and this will come as no surprise to anyone, is that this whole question of cloud versus on-prem, and is particularly phrasing it as an either-or battle, almost a theological battle, that's a thing of the past. Cloud is a part of most every organization's capabilities. They're trying to think about what that means with regards to their on-prem capabilities and how do they manage that hybridness moving forward. So a couple data points about that. You can kind of see this one, what percentage of your unstructured and semi-structured information will be stored in the cloud versus on-prem. And you can see that increase, a significant percentage, 60% now in the cloud. If I think about some of the past research that we've done going back 3, 4, 5 years, this would not have been the case 3 years ago. It would have been in the low teens at that point. So there's been a significant migration there, and one that will continue over time. When we think about, what kinds of factors influence the selection of a cloud content platform, you can kind of see at the top of the list some of the ones that you might expect. Security and privacy, clearly an issue for organizations. The cost and flexibility. And then also, how does this integrate into both business applications and into collaborative projects and collaborative workspaces? So that's really at the core of what people think about when they think about a cloud content platform. And so, that raises the question of, okay, going back to my point about either or and thinking about this in and terms rather than either or, is, how does this factor into other capabilities? And so, here's this data point. A cloud content platform by itself will never address all of our content management requirements. And clearly there's agreement with that, the world as organizations see it is going to be a hybrid one moving forward. When you ask this question, it must work in parallel with an on-premise content solution. This is where things get really tricky for organizations because they realize that it's going to be a hybrid world of on-prem and cloud-based solutions, and they got to figure out governance strategies that bridge across those capabilities. So that's the first point. We're no longer in an either-or environment with regards to cloud and on-prem. We're in an and environment. So the second thing then probes a little more deeply into those organizations that have SharePoint and Office 365 as part of their capability. And I think, the net is that this is an environment of increasing complexity as organizations move forward. And so what I'd like to do is just dive into a couple elements of that complexity moving forward. So the first one in terms of ongoing issues with SharePoint in their organization, we gave people a long list and then said, okay, well, pick 4. And so these are the issues that really top the list of concerns that people have as they think about their implementations moving forward. The first is a question of integration into business processes. That comes as not really a big surprise. This other one is a change management issue. The second one, persuading users to manage and share their content in a shared repository. Third one, aligning governance, security, and usage policies. And then lastly, this question of uniform application of metadata. So those are the core issues that people continue to struggle with in their SharePoint implementations. When you think about how that has changed over time, we asked some similar questions over the last few years with regards to SharePoint in our surveys, and the deltas are kind of interesting. So the first one is, what are the areas that are less than they were 6 years ago? And so some of the issues that I outlined as the top items, even though they're the top items, they've become kind of less influential over time, which I think reflects the maturing of the product and the maturing of the platform over time. But what you see in the ones that have increased, and this is where the complexity comes in, and we've spent a lot of time talking about this first one, which is the explosion of content and the explosion of content types. And so this idea of managing multiple content types, increasingly problematic for folks. And then secondly, just keeping up with the sheer number of upgrades. A mature product that's released every 2 or 3 years and now cloud on a continuous basis has a lot of updates associated with it. And so you can see that in the second slide, the second data point in terms of how many live versions of SharePoint organizations are supporting. Clearly that has increased as the number of versions out in the marketplace and sort of the lagging tendency of organizations, particularly at scale, to adopt the most current version as that accelerates over time. When you think about why people are migrating into Office 365 and SharePoint Online, and the two items that come up at the top of the list, the first is this question of legacy records management systems. And that's an interesting one because I think that reflects in many ways a maturing of the governance capabilities inherent to Office 365 that maybe weren't there 6 years ago, back in 2013 when we first asked that question. The second one also reflects the maturing and incorporation of file sync and share capabilities as a standalone solution into one that's an element and a feature of more robust content management solutions. And so that migration has been occurring as well. And so then the last thing that we asked people in terms of some of the complexities that they're managing, there are a number of SharePoint versions, on-prem versions, that are going to go out of support in the next few years. And we asked folks what they were planning to do with that content. And what basically came back, if you look at that bottom data point, is that that's another big driver towards Office 365 adoption, is that folks are looking at some of their on-prem, they want to stay within the product, and they migrate from there into Office 365. Third big data point that we wanted to talk about is how are people using this product? And I talked about a little bit of the branding complexity and confusion associated with Office 365 because there's a lot of capabilities inherent in Office 365. I took this screenshot from an implementation of Office 365. You see an awful lot of capabilities, and this whole concept of this platform can be a little bit daunting at first and a little bit overwhelming. And so what we wanted to do is explore a little bit, at least in terms of our community, which are these elements that are driving and which are the ones that are maybe a little bit in their early stages of implementation. So the first question we asked is, how knowledgeable would you say the average user in your organization is? And what you can see is that only 4 out of 10 describe their average user as completely knowledgeable about the product. So an awful lot of market education still needs to be done in terms of managing that complexity of platform that I talked about earlier. And when you take out IT people out of this equation, who tend to be more informed than other folks about these capabilities, the numbers go even lower in terms of completely knowledgeable. So that's an issue, continuing to educate people about what the platform is, what it can do, how the elements connect with each other, those kinds of issues. So when we probed, what are you currently using? And what you can see is kind of what you'd expect, actually. You look at the bottom part of that slide, things like Outlook Exchange, OneDrive, OneNote, SharePoint, Teams, that's really the driving wedge for deployments of Office 365 for the most part. And again, when you split the data and look at IT folks versus everybody else, the everybody else is really centered on those bottom five. That's really where the action is right now in terms of those capabilities. So the fourth thing is this question of third-party content platforms, other process platforms, other complementary tools that people use with regards to Office 365, and where are people with regards to those? You know, is Office 365 kind of a one-stop shop, or do people use it in concert with other tools? And the short answer is that they use it in concert with other tools. And I think part of the reason for that are the answers to these two questions. You know, when we asked people what percentage of your unstructured and semi-structured information is held in Office 365 and SharePoint repositories, the average came back 45%. Huge number when you think about it, but it's not everything. And so that's one element in driving the use of multiple products in conjunction with Office 365. The second one is, you know, where is PII located in your organization? And again, big percentage within Office documents, but not everything. And so that leads to the use of complementary products. It leads to sort of a hybridness in terms of the platforms that folks use to manage all of their content across the organization. And that's reflected in this chart here. You know, this idea, are people using it for, you know, is it their only content management system? Is it their main content management system? Do they use it, but it's not their main system? Do they use it for collaboration, but not really for process stuff? And so what you can see is a variety of use cases, a mix of intentions when it comes to whether SharePoint and Office 365 is the only platform or one that's used in conjunction with other platforms and other tools. When we kind of probed that a little bit further and really looked at this use of third-party add-ons, what you can see is that people view them as important. They view it as a tool to increase the functionality of the product, of enhancing the standard functionality. And so that really is a core element, I think, of an intelligent use of Office 365 and SharePoint in organizations, is to figure out where the gaps are in terms of your particular business processes and your particular needs, and use complementary products and other platforms to augment that capability. This data point is interesting too, because it shows how that's changed over time. And I think it shows the maturing of the platform. So, you know, 6 years ago, folks, you know, were viewing this question of third-party add-ons as something to fill in shortcomings of the product. And that's changed. You know, it might seem like just a semantic difference, but I think it's a substantive one. That's changed from fixing shortcomings to enhancing standard functionality. And those two seem different to me, the latter being a higher order value proposition than fixing shortcomings. And so I think that's a very encouraging sign, both in terms of the maturity of the Office 365 and SharePoint product, but also in terms of the maturity of the tools that are used in conjunction with it. And so where are folks using it? And this will not come as a surprise, because this is really typical of most content management platforms, to be honest, is when we ask people, you know, some of the areas that are the most complex, they tie to integration with back-end processes, you know, like HR or finance, integration with other platforms within the product portfolio, integration with processes that are specific to a particular industry, integration with Salesforce. You get the idea. That's really where I think the frontier of content services is this question of integrating content capabilities into process capabilities. And that's, I think, where people see some complementary products as very helpful in that process. So I'd like to just close with thanking our underwriters, AvePoint, Microsoft, Quest, OpenText, and Knowledge Lake for their support of this project. They didn't influence the research findings, but we do appreciate their support. And I would urge you to check out their products and their offerings and see what they have to offer. This is John Mancini for AIIM. Thank you very much for your time, and I hope this little summary has been helpful. And make sure that you download the full copy of the report and think about how it might help you benchmark some of the products and services within your organization. Thank you.